We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Earlier in the show, we were talking about the recent free speech case up at the Supreme Court. But now there's actually more Supreme Court cases, Scott, and it really tis the season, I think.
More free speech cases.
More free speech cases. Tis the season. I'm chucking an apostrophe in there and getting rid of a vowel. Tis the season for Supreme Court cases, Scott. So also on the same day that it was, let me get this right, it wasn't, we've just been talking about Murty versus Missouri, but it was originally Missouri versus Biden. But that wasn't the only case at the Supreme Court on that day. That was Monday last week. There was also a case that involved, of all things, the National Rifle Association, but it was a free speech case, not a Second Amendment one. Scott, tell me the details.
Mark, just like how President Donald Trump is being prosecuted criminally in federal court and being prosecuted criminally in state court, okay?
Scott, if they had another court, they'd prosecute him in that too.
Well, and also the...
I believe there's some koalas with a court, or kangaroos, or other marsupials. Take your pick.
Also, the progressives, in the form of... also, the federal government discriminated against conservative speech, but that's not by itself the threats that they face, Mark. State actors want to get in on that action as well. And Kathy Hochul and her regulator, Mr. Vullo, also discriminated against conservative speech. In this form was against the NRA specifically. The National Rifle Association, like so many other organizations with large amounts of people, exploits their membership for their financial gain through the form of selling them insurance policies, probably vehicle protection, any number of things where having just a mass of people you can mail to, generates profits, basically.
Information and data, that's the product, right?
So what happened was the governor of New York and her appointees didn't like the messages that the NRA were sending about gun control, and so they decided to simply use their power as government officials to shut them down by leveraging the banks and other financial institutions that they regulate. Sort of like, hey, I know you want this approval on Tuesday for the new branch that you're going to open. Did you know that you're sponsoring this speech by processing the NRA, like credit card transactions, or allowing them to do business in your state? You might want to revisit that. And so they did what anybody who wants to stay in business would do if the king doesn't, like that you're friends with person X. Well, maybe it's a good idea not to be friends with person X. And that's what happened. They discriminated against the NRA then. The banks said, we don't want your business. We won't take it. We refuse to, because we're afraid of the consequences that the state government is going to visit upon us by doing business with you.
So this case, Scott, what is the question that the Supreme Court is trying to answer?
Mark, this is a First Amendment case. The question is, did the governor and her actors, her appointees, violate the free speech rights of Americans and the NRA? Because don't forget, the NRA has the right to make their speech, right? And we have the right to hear it.
Yeah.
So it's both. Now, the NRA is the one who's suing. There aren't just like random plaintiffs suing for the right to have heard the NRA, but those are the twin issues that will be examined. Did they impermissibly coerce these banks and financial institutions because of the NRA messaging?
That we tend to keep finding this word coerce and coercion and various other forms of the word coercive. And it seems that so let's tie these two cases together. We had on the same day we had the Biden Missouri case, or Murty Missouri case, and now we've got the NRA against. Actually, who's the other plaintiff? That New York, the state of New York.
NRA v. Vullo. Vullo is the name of an administrator from the state of New York.
And in both cases, the accusation is that the government used its power to apply pressure in such a manner that it's and I keep coming back to this whenever we talk about this. I always come back to this thing. It's a couple of dime store thugs that are going around saying, hey, that's a nice company you got there. That's a nice business you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Yeah.
So, is there any other way to look at this? Give me the other side on this.
Justice Brett Kavanaugh asked one of the advocates, and it's funny, I listened to both cases yesterday a couple times. I can't remember which one it was, but in any case, the definition is important for both of them. What coercion was the threat had to be of the or else, and it is just adverse government action, meaning it's not I'm going to scream and yell at you, or I'm going to scream and yell at you again tomorrow. It is some negative government action is going to befall you, whether I delay your application for some important thing or deny it, meaning like any adverse action that way would trigger the coercive element to these tests.
Now, Scott, we're obviously not going to get a ruling on this until June, July time when the term ends. But do you have any indication of which way you think? I mean, I think we all know where Justice Ketanji is going to fall on this one. But regarding the Biden, Missouri one, the Murty, Missouri case, do you think
let's take the NRA fake case first, Mark, and say that the common wisdom seemed to be that the justices were inclined to rule that the NRA will be victorious, that they had their free speech rights violated by New York officials. I tend to think so too, based on the evidence presented and the tone of the question.
Well, let's dig into that just ever so quickly. So there were questions asked by the justices that were compelling to you to make them think that they will rule in favor of the NRA. What is the remedy to make the NRA whole again? Because
it'll be money damages. If it goes as I imagine it might, they will rule that the state imposed unconstitutionally on the First Amendment rights of the NRA. They'll order them to not do that, and then they'll usually in a case like this, they would actually send it down to the lower courts for a damages assessment. The Supreme Court doesn't get involved in that. They send it back down, and then there will be a damage assessment made. And the taxpayers of the state of New York, in addition to funding Kathy Hochul's generous salary and pension, will also fund the damage award to the NRA.
I think that's something that people overlook so often, is that when people abuse their power, especially this is very true at state level and to some degree at federal, when they abuse their powers and they get sued, which they invariably do in these situations, and they end up paying out. That's less schools for your kids. That's more potholes in your street. That's less rubbish pickups because your elected officials chose instead of dealing with the day-to-day issues, they decided to posture and follow some ideological madness.
This is why eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, and we have to be vigilant against these prosecutors, no matter where on the ideological spectrum there are. A number of deep red state prosecutors that are trying to, make a case about whether it's abortion or any other number of things, and the place for society to work out its dramatic policy differences is in the legislature, not in the courts. And the solutions that come out of the courts are inelegant and don't really work very well. So,
naturally, right? They're not deliberative positions. That's what your legislatures are for. We've only got a few seconds left on this. Can you give us your roundup on how you think the First Amendment case, Biden, Missouri, will go?
I think they're going to use some procedural grounds to avoid ruling on it. Unlike the NRA case, the threats are extremely specific against an extremely specific group. The generalized nature of the concerns are going to argue against. And this is just a preliminary injunction ruling, by the way. The case in chief is still in the lower court, so there's plenty of room for more evidence to be developed. But for the injunction that's in place now, I wouldn't be surprised if there were 5 votes to lift it.
Scott, thanks ever so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to just take a moment to thank our special guests today, Tim Donner and Scott Cosenza, and of course you, the listeners at home, for taking the time to join us each and every week. You are appreciated. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.